Welcome to Pilo Tales. I'm so glad you've joined us tonight for a journey into quiet deduction. Before we begin, please tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It's lovely to know where our little community of quiet listeners extends. Chapter 1: The Summons and the Shroud. The clock on the mantelpiece in Poirot's sitting room chimed 10 times, its melodic precision a source of comfort to the great detective. The morning light, usually a sharp, clean gold, was instead a dull, sickly yellow, filtered through the extraordinary density of the London fog. Every sound from the street was muffled, turning the city's roar into a persistent, indistinct hum, a phenomenon that Poirot, ever sensitive to auditory clarity, found mildly unsettling. He was examining a small, nearly invisible imperfection in the enamel of his coffee cup when the summons arrived. The parchment, heavy and expensive, bore the crest of Sir Charles Ashworth, a financier known equally for his sharp mind and his sharper dealings. Sir Charles's note was less an invitation and more a cry of intellectual distress. Monsieur Poirot. The script spiraled up the page, agitated and hurried. I find myself at a precipice. The stakes are immense, the culmination of 2 decades of planning. The matter concerns the sale of the Ashworth emeralds tomorrow morning, and I believe with absolute certainty that one of my guests intends to thwart me, or worse. I am playing a game against an unseen opponent in my own home, a game in which the rules are unknown and the penalty is absolute. I require a silent observer, a guardian of logic. Come to Blackwood Manor. Breathe life into my little grey cells, for mine, I fear, are freezing with apprehension. Poirot's initial inclination was to refuse. He disliked the English countryside, especially when it was shrouded in gloom. But the phrase unseen opponent and the admission of intellectual surrender intrigued him. He possessed an almost pathological inability to ignore a puzzle presented with such dramatic flourish. George, Poirot announced to his efficient valet, we prepare for a journey into the fog. The grey matter is awakened. The journey was a masterclass in atmospheric oppression. The first-class railway carriage was warm and dry, but outside the fog was absolute. It pressed so hard against the glass that the world seemed to have ceased to exist beyond the compartment walls. The rhythmic clack, clack, clack of the wheels became Poirot's only measure of time and distance, a soothing yet monotonous backdrop to his thoughts. He reviewed the known details of Sir Charles, a widower who had recently married a much younger woman, deeply in debt, yet still holding immense illiquid assets, and famous for making enemies of his rivals. Alighting at Little Ashworth Station was like stepping into an oil painting rendered entirely in sepia tones. The air was cold, damp, and heavy, with the scent of wet pine and distant coal smoke. Poirot was met by Mr. Jeremy Finch, Sir Charles's nephew and designated heir. Jeremy was a study in nervous angles, his long, thin fingers constantly fussing with the lapel of his ill-fitting tweed jacket. "Monsieur Poirot, thank goodness," Jeremy breathed, his voice barely audible above the engine of the waiting motor car. "We are all on edge. Uncle Charles has become quite theatrical. It concerns the study, you see, the old library study." As they drove, the car's headlamps merely carved 2 cones of light into the mist. Jeremy elaborated, his words tumbling out in a rush of anxiety. "The Ashworth emeralds are due to be sold to an American collector tomorrow. The deed of sale, the final valuation, everything is in the strong box in the library study. Uncle Charles, in a bizarre move last night, insisted the room be locked and that he alone would keep the key. He swore he would not open it until the buyer arrived." "And this fortress, as your uncle describes it, has only one entry?" Poirot asked, his eyes closed in concentration. "One main door to the hall, monsieur, which is locked, and one old servant's door, but that was bricked up and plastered over after a fire in the 1880s. It is impossible to enter or exit that room, save by the main door." Blackwood Manor appeared abruptly, a hulking mass of blackened Victorian stone. It looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Chapter 2. The Uneasy Assembly. Poirot was introduced to the assembled company in the drawing-room, a vast space that, despite the roar of the fire, felt icy and unfriendly. He was presented merely as a specialist in historical documents, brought in for the emerald's sale, a role he adopted with quiet professionalism. He began his immediate, silent cataloguing of the potential cast of the coming drama. Lady Beatrice Ashworth, Sir Charles's wife. Young, strikingly beautiful, with hair the colour of dark claret and a wardrobe that screamed Parisian expense. She sat on a gilded sofa, her posture rigid, her face perfectly composed, but radiating an almost aggressive stillness. She was sipping a glass of sherry, her eyes only briefly flickering toward Poirot, sizing him up with a cool disinterest that spoke volumes. She was known to be desperately in debt, relying entirely on her husband's wealth, a fact that made her an immediate prime suspect. Lord Cranston, a large man, heavy-set, with the ruddy complexion of a persistent drinker. His suit was expensive but strained, and his entire demeanour was one of barely contained fury. Sir Charles had recently engineered a ruinous financial play that had wiped out Lord Cranston's portfolio, stripping him of his family estates. Cranston made no effort to mask his resentment. It was a palpable weight in the room. He perpetually fiddled with a heavy silver fob watch. Miss Elara Vance, Sir Charles's secretary. She sat apart by a small writing desk, correcting proofs with a precision that bordered on fanaticism. She was pale, slim, and dressed in severe grey tweed, seemingly without an ounce of unnecessary movement or emotion. She was the picture of competence, a woman who seemed to exist purely to maintain order, yet her unnerving efficiency suggested a formidable intellect hidden beneath the mask of service. Dr. Silas Thorne, Sir Charles's physician, a man burdened by an almost visible sorrow. He was quiet, dressed in slightly threadbare clothes, and his hands, though professionally steady, twitched occasionally. He claimed to be present only to monitor Sir Charles, whose heart, he confirmed with a sigh, was failing. Thorne's expression suggested old griefs, deeper and more complicated than simple medical worry. Poirot noted the man's soft leather shoes, the kind favoured by doctors who spent long hours on their feet. Sir Charles entered the room with a glass of brandy, his face flushed. He was excessively hearty, a man attempting to shout down his own fear. "My dears, to tomorrow, to the final glorious reckoning," he toasted, clearly addressing an inner demon as much as his guests. At 11 o'clock, Sir Charles brought the tense gathering to a conclusion. He performed his ritualistic display, holding up the brass key to the study. "The fort is sealed. This key goes into the pocket of my dressing gown. Good night to all, and may the invisible hand of fortune guide us." The guests dispersed. Lord Cranston's retreat was a heavy, exasperated thud of footsteps. Lady Beatrice's silk rustled like dry leaves, a swift, elegant whisper. Dr. Thorne was almost silent, a gentle pft, pft of leather on carpet. Miss Vance simply vanished. Poirot ascended slowly, pausing at the landing. He leaned in, examining the polished mahogany newel post. There, a faint, almost greasy smear of yellowish-orange clay. It was a soil colour quite distinct from the grey, damp earth clinging to the outdoor shoes. He touched it lightly, committing the texture and colour to memory. Chapter 3. The Uncanny Rhythm. In his bedroom, Poirot left the window ajar just enough to allow the cool, damp air to penetrate, carrying the rich, earthy scent of the fog. He sat in the darkness, not reading, but listening. He was awaiting the house's confession. He reviewed the suspects. Cranston, the man of brute force and clear financial motive. Beatrice, the cold opportunist. Thorne, the man of secrets and melancholy. And Vance, the machine of silent efficiency. The silence was profound, broken only by the erratic settling sounds of the old manor, a creak of wood, the hiss of the dying fire. At precisely 12:30 a.m., the sound arrived. It was not a violent sound, nor a sudden one. It was a rhythmic, unnaturally soft tap, tap, tap. It was a cadence of intense caution, the gait of someone placing their weight meticulously on the balls of their feet, attempting to move swiftly without disturbing the air. It was a calculated silence, the opposite of the natural quiet of the house. The sound moved down the corridor toward the main staircase, descended, and then, after a brief, muffled cessation, a pause of activity, it returned. Tap, 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 tap. It ascended the stairs, moved back along the corridor, and faded away toward the servants' wing, where Miss Vance's room was located. Poirot did not move. He lay in the darkness, mapping the sound, the gait, the rhythm. It was a disciplined rhythm, too steady for a man panicking, too focused for someone sleepwalking. It was the movement of a mindset on a singular, urgent task. The softest footsteps in the deepest fog. He did not sleep for the rest of the night, instead constructing a framework of possibility around that one crucial auditory event. Chapter 4: The Impossible Fortress. The morning, if anything, was worse. The fog was now an impenetrable wool, rendering the landscape completely blind. Sir Charles failed to appear for breakfast. The American collector was due at 10. Panic, which had been simmering beneath the surface, began to boil. Jeremy Finch, pale and shaking, reported that Sir Charles's bedroom door was locked from the inside, and no amount of knocking produced a response. They gathered at the library study door. Jeremy, on hands and knees, peering through the keyhole, recoiled violently. A lamp. I see a lamp and a dark shape. A hand, Uncle Charles's hand, lying on the floor. The fortress had been breached. The impossible had occurred. Poirot calmly took charge, directing 2 footmen to break the door near the heavy brass hinges. The splintering of oak was a shocking sound of violence in the strained atmosphere. The room was the definition of the locked room mystery. Sir Charles lay dead on the rug, stabbed by the antique silver letter opener. The windows were bolted firmly shut. The bricked-up secondary door was pristine, the plaster undisturbed. The victim's dressing gown, torn slightly near the pocket, revealed the final damning detail. The heavy brass key was gone. The victim was locked in a fortress, yet the key was missing, and the killer had vanished. Inspector Japp finally arrived, struggling through the fog, bringing with him a fresh infusion of bewilderment. He toured the room, checking the windows, prodding the ancient plaster. It's madness, Poirot. The man locks himself in, then is stabbed, and the key simply evaporates. Poirot, meanwhile, was not interested in the grand, baffling impossibility. He was focused on the small things. The tiny scratch on the inside of the door frame, just beneath the latch. which he examined under his magnifying glass. It was microscopic, a half-millimeter line scored into the wood, consistent with a fine wire being pulled taut. He also found the Greek poetry book, open beside the body, its spine broken from frequent use. A single, almost invisible pencil line marked a verse on page 47, line 3, referencing the trickery of the gods, chapter 5. The labyrinth of motives. Poirot began his methodical interrogation, separating motive from opportunity. Lady Beatrice? She maintained a cool, unshakable facade. Her alibi was vague. Reading in her room, confirmed only by her maid noticing her lamp was on until after midnight. Poirot's inquiry. Madame, did you know that your husband was using certain documents to manipulate certain individuals? Beatrice's response. Charles was always manipulating. He lived for it. I paid him no mind. I only require enough money to maintain my life. I was reading a terrible French novel until well past 1 o'clock. Lord Cranston. His rage was still palpable, but his alibi was equally weak, a sedative for a migraine, witnessed by no one. Poirot's inquiry. Lord Cranston, you suffered a severe financial reversal at Sir Charles's hands. Your watch, I believe, was briefly missing last night. Cranston's response. I wished him dead, yes. But I am not a common brute who uses a letter opener. My watch? I misplaced it. This talk of locked rooms is nonsense. Someone has merely created a theatrical piece of murder. Dr. Silas Thorne. The doctor was subdued, his eyes haunted. His alibi was early retirement and a deep sleep, verified only by the assumption of his nature. Poirot's inquiry. Dr. Thorne, you have been Sir Charles's physician for many years. Was there a secret, a profound pressure that Sir Charles could exert over you? Thorne's response. He hesitated, a flash of pure terror crossing his face. No, monsieur. Only professional duty. His heart was failing. I merely tried to manage his anxiety. Miss Ilara Vance. Her alibi remained the strongest. A confirmed telephone call to her sister in London at 12:45 a.m., lasting 15 minutes. The call records were irrefutable. Poirot's inquiry. Miss Vance, you are a woman of meticulous order. What could disturb your routine? Vance's response. Only necessity, monsieur. I had a matter of family business I had to discuss. The call was placed from my room phone, as the records confirm. Poirot presented the Caïqueon cipher. Page 47, line 3. Miss Vance, seeing the marked page, became momentarily flustered. She recovered quickly, admitting Sir Charles used such ciphers for financial notes, linking them to an address. The cipher is not 473, Poirot declared, but the address, 473. The number 473. Dr. Thorne, do you recognize it? Dr. Thorne finally broke. His face grey, he whispered the truth. 473 Willow Lane, an old dispensary in the East End. Sir Charles bought it to suppress the truth. The suicide of Sir Charles's late brother 20 years ago was not an accident, but a desperate act caused by a catastrophic misdiagnosis by the young Dr. Thorne. Sir Charles had secured the original medical records and, for 2 decades, had used them to bleed Thorne dry, threatening to ruin his career and professional standing. The Kykeon cipher, referencing a poisonous draught, was Sir Charles's final mocking reminder of the lethal secret. Chapter 6. Eliminating the noise. The motive was laid bare. Dr. Thorne had the most compelling reason to silence Sir Charles permanently. Yet his alibi, though weak, and his gait, though quiet, did not match the precise, rhythmic tap-tap-tap Poirot had logged. Poirot then addressed the red herrings, the deliberate distractions placed by the killer. Red herring 1. The watch. Lord Cranston's silver fob watch found under Jeremy Finch's pillow. A masterpiece of misdirection, Poirot scoffed. The killer, knowing Cranston's habit of handling his watch, took it, placed it clumsily beneath the heir's pillow, hoping to suggest a botched conspiracy or a fight between rival enemies. Too noisy, too obvious. It is discarded. Red herring 2. The handkerchief. Tucked into a small crevice in the fireplace of the study, Poirot had found a pristine silk handkerchief, scented with Lady Beatrice's signature French tobacco. It was an unmistakable clue. A fingerprint of scent, Poirot noted. But why hide it? It suggests Lady Beatrice was here, but wished to conceal the fact that she was here at the time of the murder, perhaps meeting Charles for a final confrontation. But it is placed too obviously to be a forgotten item. It is a planted item, meant to implicate the cold, greedy wife. Poirot swept the room with his eyes. The killer was not clumsy, nor obvious. The killer was meticulous, patient, and precise, a master of detail. The investigation returned to the 2 core elements, the method, the scratch on the door, and the opportunity, the soft footsteps. Poirot explained the impossible locking. Sir Charles believed he was locking the room, turning the key. But the killer, from the outside, had inserted a fine, thin piece of piano wire, or perhaps a strong, stiff silk thread, under the door, and positioned it so it held the latch back by a mere sliver. When Sir Charles turned his key, he heard the satisfying click and thought the bolt was seated. But the latch was held open. The door was closed, but not locked. He left the key in his pocket and lay down to die. The killer waited. Poirot continued, pacing slowly. They waited until the house was silent. They used the fine wire to slip the latch completely, silently opening the door. They entered, committed the act, took the key from the victim's pocket, the key that Sir Charles believed had locked the room, and then Using the same wire, they pulled the door shut, ensuring the latch fell properly into the strike plate, locking the room from the outside. The tiny scratch on the frame is the mark of that final action. Jap, astonished, confirmed the theory with the help of a technical expert who could verify the possibility of this wire lock method on the specific vintage of the lock. Chapter 7. The Rhythmic Betrayal. The method was established. Now the opportunity had to be definitively matched. Poirot focused on the only suspect with a seemingly unbreakable alibi, Miss Elara Vance. Miss Vance, Poirot began, folding his hands precisely. You have a formidable mind. You are a lover of order. You are also the only person who knew the true meaning of the number 473 immediately, though you only gave the financial context, not the criminal context of the blackmail. Why did you protect Dr. Thorne? Miss Vance remained silent, her composure finally beginning to crack under the relentless pressure of logic. The soft footsteps in the fog, Miss Vance, Poirot pressed. The precise, disciplined tap, tap, tap at midnight. It was a rhythmic tread, a deliberate attempt to be silent, but with the specific small noise of a leather sole on polished wood. We must examine your shoes. He had George retrieve her footwear. They were small, highly polished, expensive leather brogues, favoured for their quiet efficiency. When Jap had her walk across the hall floor, the sound was distinct. Tap, 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 a nearly perfect match to the sound Poirot had heard. It was a gait refined by years of quiet movement in service. You are the killer, Miss Vance, Poirot stated, his voice quiet but absolute. But you committed the crime at 1:30 a.m., after the house was still, after you had established your alibi. Your footsteps at 12:30 a.m. were merely the preparation. He continued, his logic unfolding like a mathematical proof. The 12:45 a.m. call to your sister was perfect. It lasted 15 minutes. But the telephone in your room is old. The sister confirmed your voice, but not your presence. You recorded yourself earlier, perhaps reading a passage of a letter onto your dictaphone. You set the machine to play the recording down the telephone line at 12:45 a.m., creating an auditory alibi that would place you firmly in your room, conversing innocently. Before the recording, at 12:30 a.m., you had already slipped down the stairs, inserted the wire into the door, and returned to your room to initiate the call. Your steps were soft because you were guarding the sound of the operation. After the call ended, you waited for another 45 minutes, ensuring everyone was asleep. Then, silently, you crept down, performed the murder, took the key, and locked the room permanently. Finally, Poirot introduced the last, subtle piece of evidence: the yellow clay on the newel post. The smear of yellow clay, he explained, is the soil of Willow Lane, where the abandoned clinic stood. You went there the day before, Miss Vance, to confirm that the old medical records, the instruments of Dr. Thorne's blackmail, were still in the old dispensary, as Sir Charles claimed. You found the old clinic building under demolition, confirming the presence of that distinct yellowish clay on your shoes. You feared for Dr. Thorne's reputation and his life savings, driven by an emotion you have so carefully hidden, deep, protective affection. Miss Vance, unable to counter the precise logic, slumped into silence. The motive was not greed, but a twisted, desperate devotion to Dr. Thorne. She had decided that eliminating the source of the doctor's pain was the only way to save him. Chapter 8. The Final Reckoning. With the secretary's cold confession, a minimalist admission of method and motive, the case was closed. Miss Vance admitted her feelings for Dr. Thorne, a man she revered for his kindness and quiet suffering, and confessed to using her knowledge of the house, Sir Charles's habits, and her professional tools, the dictaphone, to orchestrate the perfect crime. The key, she revealed, was tossed into a thicket of holly bushes just outside the conservatory window. Dr. Thorne, devastated and broken, confessed to the blackmail context, his terrible secret now public knowledge, though his hands were clean of murder. The others, Cranston and Beatrice, were left to face the financial and personal ruin of the estate. Poirot watched the arrest with a characteristic mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Mon Dieu, the tragedy of human passion, he murmured to Jap. The quiet ones, Inspector. They are always the ones who surprise us. The soft footsteps were not the sound of a desperate killer, but the sound of an efficient, organized woman preparing her final, lethal alibi. He gathered his effects, straightening his tie, and preparing for the return journey. The fog had completely dissipated, revealing a sky of clear, crisp blue. The world outside the manor was sharp, clean, and orderly again. The natural order of the universe had been restored once again by the careful application of logic. In the train carriage, George offered him a perfectly steeped cup of chamomile. Poirot settled back, allowing the new, clear rhythm of the rails to wash over him. The little grey cells, having fought through the fog and conquered the labyrinth, could finally rest. The case of the rhythmic, soft footsteps in the fog was concluded. Good night, dear listeners.